705 MEPs, and the lobby meetings of each MEP is in their own webpage. So you actually have 705 web pages where you would have to go through, and then you just have a list. I really like transparency. I really like anti-corruption, but not even I go on a Sunday morning scrolling through those 705 web pages to check the information, which is not even aggregated. So then you would need to analyze the information itself.
In this third installment of the Brussels Insider series, we will be taking a look at the issue of transparency in EU institutions. Through the interviews we conducted with policymakers and stakeholders in the field, we aimed to uncover if the EU was as opaque as it is commonly made out to be by certain actors, or if there is a fundamental flaw of how the current transparency measures are communicated to the general public. We first spoke to Una Clarke, Parliamentary Assistant to Irish MEP Frances Fitzgerald, about transparency in her work.
I think transparency for us in our work, we're kind of aware of it, like very aware that we have to, meet the standards that are in the transparency register and the interinstitutional agreements that we have between Commission, Parliament and Council as regards transparency.
The Transparency Register requires EU institutions to list the lobbyists who contact them. This is done to ensure that those seeking to interact with EU institutions declare their interest publicly and provide information about themselves if they wish to carry out certain activities in order to influence EU policies.
So we, whenever we're contacted by lobbyists, let's put it like that, public affairs professionals, we try to make sure that we report it in the way that we should. So we keep an eye on it, and like every few months we update kind of our transparency register and to what extent we have been lobbied and who has been lobbying us.
For MEPs, the register is not a burdensome process.
We do it every few months. We don't do it kind of day to day. We go back and update it because it's actually pretty straightforward. So yesterday, it's basically we go into a particular place on the Parliament website, we put in kind of just the topic of the meeting, where it was, who it was with, what the topic was, and in what role Frances was meeting them, whether she's a rapporteur, a shadow rapporteur on the report, or just as a member, and then related to the work of what committee.
The use of the Transparency Register might come naturally to Ms Clarke, as Ireland is one of the few European member states that has laws which force politicians to register the meetings that they have with lobbyists. However, not all member states have such registers. This difference between member states is emblematic of the degrees of transparency that exist among themselves. We asked Vitor Teixiera from Transparency International EU to comment upon the differences between different member states and different EU institutions.
In one form or another in different countries, and then put all of that, the best practice of everything we found, put that together and say, okay, if someone will have all of these best practices, this is 100%. And now how do the different countries and the EU institutions stack up to this 100%? And there was one country that passed the 50% mark, which was Slovenia. And the European institutions, well, the European Commission did pretty well, the European Parliament did more or less, and the European Council was terrible. And some of these, in fact, it was very close to the bottom with some other countries. Hungary, for example, had 7 out of 100 or something like this.
So, there is a difference between how transparent member state governments are in the EU. However, we are surprised to find out that within EU institutions, the amount of transparency differs substantially, with the Council being described as the most opaque.
So the transparency level differs quite a lot from institution to institution. In fact, it has come to a bit of an absurd where you had the letter from a majority of parliaments at national level writing to the council which is constituted by the governments of the member states, and the parliaments were calling the council a black box, and that they had no clue what was happening in the council, and they would like to have a bit more information. This is a bit of an extreme example of how lack of transparency, sometimes the level of intransparency that there is, or opacity that there is at EU level.
Perhaps the reason for the lack of transparency in the Council may be to do with the need for efficiency and speed in decision making. Again, the differences between the institutions were highlighted by our interviewees.
I think the level of transparency, certainly on anything to do with financial, is kind of needed, just so it makes it clear that people know. In terms of a trade-off, I don't think there's that big of a trade-off between transparency and efficiency. It certainly is something that, from a transparency perspective, it doesn't really impact on. No, I don't think it does impact that much.
The council is famously the most opaque institution. You can't get anything about the discussion.
So I don't think it's a valid argument that people who have been elected by their own citizens, by their own countrymen, simply don't have the time to tell the people that voted for them who they are meeting and what they're doing on other people's behalf.
So, how do citizens interact with transparency measures, and how can these measures be improved to further engage citizens? MEP Colm Markey tends to get feedback on his work, but nothing in particular on the lobbying register. He also suggests that despite looking for feedback from constituents, few are actually engaged besides staying updated on topics they care about through social media, which is an inherently more digestible form of information broadcasting.
Well, look, all the time you'll be looking for feedback from constituents. Only yesterday I was in the IT in Dundalk with about 50 students getting opinions and giving perspectives and getting their feedback on it. So just that level of engagement all the time, and then between social media and websites and that, we keep them updated with a lot of what we're doing. Look, it's there. You'd be surprised how few people actually look at it in the long run. People who want to find out something look at it, but by and large most people don't. Once you declare what's there, that's all they really want.
Vitor from Transparency International EU also makes a similar point. Citizens care about transparency around specific topics and files, but don't seem to be aided in their search for this information by the EU institutions. There are over 705 MEPs who will undoubtedly be subjected to lobbying attempts in their work. However, there is not a consolidated register for all of this information. While the EU currently ranks quite well for transparency, it is a long way from the ideal scenario. One way to address this may be through integritywatch.eu, a website which aggregates information on lobbying, meetings, and expenditure of EU representatives and lobby groups.
Journalists, other civil society organizations, researchers, students many times, because of the thesis they're writing, and even people that really care about a specific topic, they do go to this website.
We can see that citizens do care about transparency, especially in relation to specific topics. Despite the differences between institutions, and while the use of lobby registers and other transparency requirements are beneficial, the EU still has a long way to go in ensuring that its transparency measures allow for citizen engagement. Transparency isn't really the availability of information, but rather the manner in which that information is presented and communicated in a way that people can understand.